Okay, so this conversation is going to be a little bit sus. Because when it comes to the Stanley Cup Finals, it's been a very big note to talk about the physicality and the overall aggression that has been shared by both of these teams. Now, you already know the specific instances that we are referring to when we bring up, hey, who could get suspended, who is not going to get suspended, what's the verdict looking like, what are the NHL insiders saying. We're talking in particular about the Leon Draisaitl elbow to the jaw of Aleksander Barkov. We're also talking about a bunch of the other shenanigans that we had seen throughout the first two games. Warren Foegele, Eetu Luostarinen. There are a few other names that you could toss in there if you wanted to get all snarky about it. But when it comes to the situation, this is kind of where the NHL becomes a little bit weird when you start acknowledging how outcomes will affect punishments. And I get it, you can say that it's somewhat of a diplomatic way to assess penalties, but when it comes to the grandest stage of them all, and no, we're not talking about WrestleMania, it starts to open the door to things becoming, let's just say, a tad excessive. So to help us out, let's go over to this article on ProHockeyRumors.com, published by Josh Erickson. Cup final notes, suspensions, Barkov, Nurse, Ekblad, and Luostarinen. The reason I like this article a lot is because it goes over all of the things at once, and it provides sources as to where these things are being said. So, starting out with the article, the first paragraph says, "Don't expect any supplemental discipline to be announced today for a pair of Oilers forwards that laid controversial hits in last night's Game 2 loss." Leon Draisaitl's check to the head of Panthers captain Alex Barkov that knocked him out of the game will go unpunished past the 2-minute minor assessed on the play, Renaud Lavoie reports. Warren Foegele also won't receive a suspension for his knee-on-knee hit on Eetu Luostarinen that got him tossed from the game in the first period, said ESPN's Greg Wyshynski. If you wanted to go out there and read these tweets, they are available on social media. Renaud Lavoie says don't expect Draisaitl to be suspended for his actions against Aleksander Barkov, and then you had Greg Wyshynski saying the same thing. On the Draisaitl hit on Barkov, the sense I get is that Barkov's status for Game 3, which is not injury, but whether he plays or not or doesn't, could tip this thing to a suspension. But if he does play, I don't think Draisaitl gets more than a fine. At this point, my sense is no suspension. And then he says, oh, and there's nothing coming down the pike for Warren Foegele, I don't believe. Typically, the NHL doesn't just suspend because there's an injury on the play. I will say that shifts a little bit in the playoffs because it's 7 games against the same team. Think Bunting's suspension for injuring Chernak between the Leafs and the Lightning, for example. Was it a bad hit by Draisaitl? I thought it should have been a major. But was it predatory? Was there intent? Was this a player with a history of these things? That's partially what player safety is considering, because obviously a suspension at this late of a stage is critical. Now, you could have your own opinions. There are a lot of opinions being tossed out there in the replies of that Twitter thread, but in my opinion, if you wanted to go out there and say it, you know, if it's done in the regular season, if it's Leon Draisaitl or some fourth-line plug that goes out there and delivers a hit to the jaw, if that's a regular season play, I think that's probably a suspension, at least for a game or two. It's even more likely to be a suspension because it's delivered to the best forward on Florida in Aleksander Barkov. That guy, whether he has a broken jaw or not, he is going to play. Like, I don't think anybody is expecting Barkov to miss any time, even if that jaw came straight off Mortal Kombat style. They're going to find a way to tape him up, they're going to find a way to put him out on the ice, and they're going to find a way to get him playing. And then after the finals, we'll find out, oh yeah, the guy actually lost 3 teeth in that play, and he was bleeding the entire time, we just didn't see it. Like, hockey players are tough SOBs, and we recognize that this always seems to happen where guys play through the worst injuries. Matthew Tkachuk couldn't even get out of bed properly last year. Hopefully he's doing all right now, but that was the situation with how everything went down in 2023. So Alex Barkov, him playing, him not playing, unless the guy is like on a deathbed, he's not gonna not play. He's going to play. We know this. And for Leon Draisaitl, I get the idea that Wyshynski is saying, like, if Barkov misses out Game 3, then maybe there's a suspension handed out to Draisaitl, because that's when the NHL would say, oh, because he was so hurt that he wasn't able to play, we gotta suspend the guy that hurt him. But at the same time, it's Leon Draisaitl. Like, the Stanley Cup Finals are already getting a lot of flack because the referees are making a lot of calls that should be calls, shouldn't be calls, whatever. what if the NHL steps in and starts suspending some of the best players in the game as a result? I mean, Warren Foegele, say what you want about him. His hit on Eetu Luostarinen in the knee-on-knee, it was pretty bad. Is it suspension-worthy? I'm not too sure, but if you wanted to throw out a suspension in the regular season for that, I'd have no problem with it. No problem. But then it goes the other way as well. People are going to be like, oh, but OEL, he did the same thing. Oh, Sam Bennett, this and that. Like, why is Warren Foegele's a 5-minute major? Why did he get ejected from the game? Why were the other ones just 2? Like, people are going to get so pissy about penalty calls and verdicts that it's going to be so difficult to navigate, especially if you're the NHL. I do not envy George Parros in being the guy to suspend players during the Stanley Cup final. Like, it happens sometimes. I mean, Aaron Rome was the big one, I'd say, that comes to my mind right away, but I feel like there's not going to be any situation like that happens again. Let's go out there and reread the other notes from this article on ProHockeyRumors.com. It's good news for the Edmonton squad that needs to battle back from a 2-0 series deficit as the series shifts back to the ice later this week. The Oilers became the first team since the Penguins in 2008 to score 1 or less goal in the first 2 games of the Stanley Cup final. I should say fewer there. While they were dominant but stymied by Panthers netminder Sergei Bobrovsky in their Game 1 loss, Game 2 saw Florida's defense limit the Oilers to 19 shots on goal and no high-danger chances at even strength. Draisaitl, in particular, would be a huge loss since he's second in the club in playoff goals and points in 20 games. Now, yeah, I think we didn't talk about that aspect as well. We probably should. If Leon Draisaitl and the Oilers were up 2-0, then maybe he gets suspended. Maybe it's a lot easier for the NHL to say, who cares? Suspend him for 1 game. They're up 2-0. They'll go down. They'll lose a game. It'll be a 2-1 series, worst case scenario, and then Draisaitl comes back. Because the Oilers are already down 2-0, maybe it's a lot more difficult for the NHL to do that. And I know, like, in theory, it shouldn't really be that way. Like, a bad hit is a bad hit. A suspendable play is a suspendable play. The fact that you're down 2-0 versus being up 2-0 should not change the magnitude of how suspendable a play is, but just because that's not how it's supposed to be doesn't mean that's not how it is. That's just how it's going to go down. The people who make these decisions are human, and they let human ideas factor into whether or not things are suspendable or not. Let's scroll down and read more about this. While Draisaitl will be available for Game 3, Barkov is a question mark. Panthers head coach Paul Maurice said today that the first-line center isn't feeling any worse this morning after taking the German forward's elbow to his jaw, but will undergo further evaluation tomorrow, via Florida Hockey Now's George Richards on Twitter. The team hasn't confirmed the nature of Barkov's injury, but speculation indicates he's likely in concussion protocol. Barkov, 28, is tied for the team lead in postseason scoring with 19 points in 19 games and has averaged 21.31 per game, second to Sam Reinhart amongst Florida forwards. Okay, so that is not great. Barkov still being in concussion protocol, maybe not feeling all too good. I said it earlier in the video, I'll say it again, he will play, 100% he will play, but this is not really all too good of a circumstance for a guy who should be one of the best players on the team and who is. I mean, you don't want to see the guy go out there in some sort of a concussed state or a broken jaw kind of state. Speaking to reporters via Zoom this morning, the Oilers bench boss, though, Chris Knobloch, had no update on the status of defenseman Darnell Nurse, per NHL.com's Nick Kotsonika. The much-maligned blue liner missed several chunks of last night's loss after taking an awkward hit from Panthers winger Evan Rodriguez late in the first period. Nurse has just 3 assists and a -15 rating in 20 postseason games, and his potential absence for Game 3 would make way for Cody Ceci to re-enter the lineup after being a healthy scratch for the first time as an Oiler in Game 2. Now, you could say that maybe if you have Nurse coming back out, Ceci going in, it's like a net neutral because both Nurse and Ceci have been pretty bad this playoffs. I don't want to say it's a good thing that Nurse got hurt, but I will understand if Oilers fans are not too disappointed with that update. And finally, we had this. Eetu Luostarinen and defenseman Aaron Ekblad both missed chunks of Game 2 with respective lower body injuries, but they'll be good to go moving forward. Paul Maurice confirmed this morning via the team's Jameson Olive. Luostarinen wasn't able to put any weight in his left leg while being helped off of the ice after his collision with Foegele, but managed to return before the end of the period. Ekblad, meanwhile, twisted his ankle awkwardly after getting tangled up with the Oilers star Connor McDavid, but still logged nearly 23 minutes of action in last night's win. So these are our updates when it comes to injuries and potential suspensions. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Luostarinen and Ekblad coming back, Barkov still being worked on, Darnell Nurse maybe not coming back, who really knows, and the idea of suspensions being tossed out there to guys like Leon Draisaitl, Warren Foegele, and anybody else that you think deserves that conversation. Thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. and bye.